Hi everyone. On today's episode of Therapy with Adam and Eve, we have a very exciting guest. We're joined by our colleague, Laura Eid, who is currently studying for a doctorate in clinical psychology at King's College London, and she's in her first year. So hi Laura, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. It's very exciting to have you on because obviously clinical doctorates are so highly contested, and they seem to be kind of like the apex of every aspiring psychologist's career. So it's really interesting to get your insight on this. So just for people who aren't entirely sure, could you kind of briefly clarify what the role of a clinical psychologist is, and what kind of about that role made you really want to go down this route?
Yeah, of course. So a clinical psychologist, so first of all, the doctorate in clinical psychology is 3 years, and you actually get to become an HCPC accredited clinical psychologist. So you are a trainee for 3 years, and then you become fully qualified. And the clinical psychologist has actually has different roles. So the first one is that they get to see clients from all ages. So all ages and a really wide presentation range. So it can start with something a bit more mild to something a bit more complex presentation. Clinical psychologist also writes medical legal reports. They also they have more of a managing role as well. So for me, the thing that attracted me most to clinical psychology is the diversity in the role. It's not just about seeing clients, but it's also about working in a multidisciplinary team. It's also about doing assessments, whether it's cognitive assessments or bigger types of assessments that can take some kind of additional training, about also being maybe involved in some medical legal reports. And yeah, it's mainly the diversity of the role that attracted me.
Yeah, thank you. I guess it is a lot that you're able to do, which I do like the variety. Really, I think that kind of stops things from getting boring. Um, but I guess right now you're studying at King's, is that right? You're doing your
Yeah.
and so what was it that made you pick King's, and what were your other options when you were applying for a PhD in clinical psychology?
Yeah, so I think choosing a doctorate is quite a process in itself, because you want to choose it, you want to do your research. First of all, for me, I chose King's because I wanted to be in London. So location is something that you want to take into consideration as well, because all the placements are in London as well. I also looked at the different therapeutic approaches they offered. And so here at King's, mainly what we focus on is CBT and systemic therapy. And you want to look also at the structure of the course. Is this a course that, how are the placements separated? So at King's, you have 6 placements over the 3 years, each 6 months. And what you do is during the first 2 years, you're allocated a placement. You don't get to choose those, but during the first year, you get a child placement and an adult placement. And then during your second year, you work with older adults and then people with an intellectual disability. And what's really nice about King's is that during your third year, you get to choose the 2 last placements. So based on what you already work, in which service you worked in, you get to choose which one you still feel you haven't experienced. So for example, if you've never worked with you didn't have an opportunity to practice DBT, you can get to choose a placement where they actually use DBT, or a certain population you didn't get a chance to work with. So this is really for me why I chose King's. This last big part mainly just having the opportunity to choose the placements that I'm interested in.
That sounds really good. I know a lot of places just like solely focus on CBT, and I think especially when you're wanting to go into it and be a very diverse practitioner, it's great to obviously have variety in the approaches that you can use. So I was also just wondering, because obviously everyone's journey onto the clinical doctorate is quite different. What was your kind of academic and employment experience prior to being offered a place?
Yeah. So I actually did my undergraduate degree in Canada, so in Montreal, at McGill University, and I did an undergrad in psychology. And then I moved to London about 2.5 years ago, where I started working as a research assistant at King's. So I worked in the eating disorder. So I worked in the eating disorder department, and I was really lucky to have two really good research supervisors that involved me in their research, and I was able to get two publications, which I think were a really big plus on my application for the doctorate. And then I also wanted to have some clinical experience as well, because the only clinical experience I had before during my undergrad was shadowing psychologists, psychiatrists. It was more indirect contact. So I really wanted to have this more direct experience. So I applied to this to work at private therapy clinic as a psychology assistant. And I was able to see clients mainly with anxiety and depression. And I think the fact that I had both clinical and research skills were really a plus when I started the doctorate. And I think, but it's really important to know that when you start the doctorate, some people only have research experience, some only have clinical experience, and it's okay. You have some, you're lacking some skills that other people have, and that's the beauty of the doctorate, is that you actually, it's very supportive. You ask for help from people in your cohort. It's a non-competitive environment, because at the end you want to, it's mainly about passing your doctorate, and it's not about being the best in the cohort. So it's very supportive, and you get to understand from other people's skills, and whether it's research or clinic. So people don't have to worry about if they only have research experience or clinical. It's good to have both, at least a bit of both, but it's okay if you don't have publications. It's not a requirement in general.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. I think that is something that I actually started to realize as well, in that it is kind of unrealistic to expect every candidate to have loads of research experience and loads of clinical experience. But it feels like rather they're looking for like things that make somebody a good therapist. Because obviously the doctorate is a learning process, so you're going to learn the other things. But I just wanted to ask about the written side of the application. And so like, just how much weight do you think that has? And also, how did you kind of approach it? And do you have any tips for somebody who's trying to do the written aspect of it?
Yeah, of course. So the written application actually is the first step. So you do want to give a good impression of who you are as a person. I think for me the biggest tip is not to list your CV, not to just say what you've done, but rather what have you learned from it. What do you feel you can still, what do you feel you can? What's the gap? What's missing? Why would they choose you as a doctorate as a doctorate candidate if you already have everything? They want to see, okay, this person is open to learning, this person knows how to reflect on their experience. And this is something that I would really emphasize, just reflection in your written application. I do feel like if you want to start writing it, and then you want to wait a bit and look at it again, I think the first draft is often something you don't have to put too much pressure on the written application. I think what's a good idea is to write it on the long run. So starting early and actually, reopening your laptop and looking at it maybe a month later, because you're going to learn a lot from the experience learned during the month. um, you're going to learn a lot from talking to people, from having other people read it if they can. So if you have the opportunity to talk to people who are on the doctorate, or any supervisor or mentor, I think this is a really good way to write your application.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think sometimes we can get a bit shy about sharing like our kind of written work, but obviously it's so important to like have a second opinion on it, rather than just, because I think you sometimes like lose, you go very tunnel vision when you're writing things, and then you completely like lose any sense of objectiveness towards it. So yeah, definitely getting a second opinion sounds like a very sensible idea. Coming on to kind of the interview side of things, what was your kind of interview experience like, and how did you prepare for
Yeah, so the interview, I'm not gonna lie to you, it was really stressful. It is a stressful experience because just for me, I do get quite stressed in front of interviews. Um, so the way I so interviews really change from one university to the other. At King's, I was lucky enough that it was a straightforward interview with, you know, straightforward question, nothing too. Uh, I didn't feel like they were trying to trick me at all. So you could have this type of interview, or you could have some interviews where you have a test to do first, and then if you get accepted, if you pass the test, then you get an interview. Some of them ask for clinical or research vignettes. Um, so you do want to prepare, maybe understanding a bit, you know not really analyzing, but looking at your experience and learning, okay, what have and looking at what you've learned from the experience, and being able to summarize what your experience is, being able to show that you reflect, maybe showing your thinking, how you're thinking while answering the question. So if you do make a mistake during your interview, it's okay to just say, oh, actually that's not what I meant, and go back and change your words. It's okay to show your thinking process. I think it's a good way to go about it. My biggest way of preparing, I think, was to do mock interviews. I asked whoever could to help me prepare. I would ask someone, my supervisor at the clinic, to just ask me questions that I didn't come up with, just to be able to answer, on the spot. And I think this is, for me, that was the biggest help. I prepared for the interview. Of course, you do prepare for some questions, some basic questions that you feel would come into an interview. And then at some point you practice it, but at some point you stop because you don't want to over rehearse it. And what I did later on was work on my stress and the anxiety. So how am I able to manage the anxiety of doing an interview? Everything was remote at the time. It was a bit strange. Um, but I did dress up as if I was going to the interview. I did, I really cleaned the house. Everything was organized, just to put myself in the mindset. I planned a day off. I think I planned something after the interview, just so that I don't have to think about the interview all the time. Of course, you do end up thinking about it and refreshing your emails nonstop, but I mean, it's normal, and it's okay to show that you're anxious. They don't expect you to be non-anxious at all. I think it would be weird not to expect some kind of anxiety, but it's okay if they ask a question. When they ask the question, just take a deep breath, read, maybe ask them to repeat the question if you feel, and then you don't have to answer right away. You're allowed to take some seconds to think about how you're going to answer it. And I think this, for me, made a huge difference. I actually, during one of my mock interview, my supervisor told me that I looked a bit kind of a robot. So she told me to just have like a small sticker next to my camera saying something like smile, something as basic as this, but just a reminder that, I'm a human, I'm applying for a doctorate. I really wanted this doctorate. So I just wanted to I just wanted to discuss why I felt this was a good sorry about this. Why I felt this was a good fit.
I guess talking about humans, your dog just came on screen, so it's fine. But no, I do think you're right. Absolutely, like it is. Sometimes it would be weird for them to. It would be weird for you to not be anxious because it's something that's really important to you. So the anxiety kind of shows that you actually really care. Um, but yeah, thank you so much for discussing what you've said so far about the application process. That's all really helpful, especially for somebody who hopefully try to apply this year. Um, so I just want to ask a little bit about the actual doctorate itself, if that's okay. So just like, could you just tell us how you're finding it so far? Obviously, it's such a big jump because it is so intense and it is difficult. But just how you're finding it and what you're finding most challenging, and maybe also what you're enjoying the most about it.
Yeah, so the doctorate is so a week in the doctorate at King's, Mondays and Fridays during your first year, you have class all day. And then on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, you have placement. So as I said, you're allocated to a placement, and it's it seems like the week is quite busy. Eventually, during summer, you don't have class on Monday and Fridays. And even during your second year, you have a day off where you can study. But I think this is maybe one of the biggest challenges during the first year, is that you find it hard to have some time to study and to do your research. I think another challenge is getting, I'm an international student, so for me it was a bit understanding the NHS system and everything around this. But I mean, my supervisors till now have been very supportive. There is, as I said before, it's a very supportive environment where people help you out. There is a lot of resources available. So you may feel lost at some point, feeling like this is a population I've never worked with. I don't even know how to start. But just dividing this big challenge into smaller steps, something that's more manageable, has been something that I've been doing. So, for example, I've never worked with children before, and right now I'm in a placement with children. And so the way I'm going about it is going session by session rather than thinking about all the therapy and how it's supposed to be. And then discussing in between the sessions with my supervisor, maybe what I've done, what could be done next, how to improve, and just reflecting on the session. And I think this is really helpful to try to manage the workload and every new information coming your way, just to break it down into smaller steps, to look at, okay, you have a deadline at the end of the year, setting your own deadlines. It's still something I'm learning to do. It's a bit hard when you have a deadline at the end of the year to actually start working on it. But you get to a point where you feel like, I don't have much choice, I really need to get things done. But the support is amazing. The whole program has been really supportive and really nice. Um, so I guess it is difficult, it is intense. You learn to manage it. You will have some periods where it's more hectic than others, and some periods where you feel like the placement is a bit slower, and you may think, this is weird, other people are so busy all the time. It's okay, it's a personal experience. You are with your knowledge, with yourself, at one particular placement at a particular time. So don't try to compare it with everyone else in the course. Just, do what you feel you need to do. Learn as much as you want. I think it's about embracing that this is about, we're still allowed to learn, we're still learning, and we're still allowed not to make mistakes, but not to have everything to the perfect, if that makes sense. We are trainees after all, so we're still learning.
Thank you, Laura. I think it's really nice to hear, especially I feel like a lot of people who are in the process of applying really put the doctorate as like as the pinnacle of their career, and they put it on a pedestal, and they think, they kind of like forget that there probably are going to be stressful parts of it, and that, it's not all flowers and sunshine once they get onto it. But obviously, as you mentioned, it's a very supportive environment, as you would hope in this kind of profession. You've also mentioned that obviously you're working with children at the moment as part of one of your placements. What kind of are the placement requirements on your course, and what kind of placements have you been doing so far?
Yeah. So my first placement at King's has been working with students. So it was an adult placement. So students mainly with anxiety. So there are other presentation. I've mainly been working with anxiety. So it was a really good way to learn how to do a CBT course from beginning to end, 12 sessions, finishing the course of therapy, and then actually seeing some results. So I worked, for example, with people with trichotillomania, and something that I've never worked with this presentation before, but you learn so much on the go. So trichotillomania, trauma, health anxiety, panic disorder. So these are the kind of presentation that are a bit more straightforward, in the sense where it's a particular CBT. There is particular CBT treatment that you follow, a specific protocol that you follow, that actually leads to a lot of results. Of course, therapy is not linear. It's gonna it depends on the person, it depends on the context, and depends on a lot of things. But this is mainly the population I saw in my first placement. Right now, I'm working at the Adolescents at Risk Forensic Service, which is completely different. It's mainly adolescents. So I think between 10 and 18 years old. And it's individuals with intellectual disability. It's individuals with harmful sexual behavior, challenging behavior. It's more complex. Often you don't get to do CBT, 12 sessions and then you're done. You're more flexible. You get a lot more people who don't attend. You have to coordinate with the whole system. Often there is the police involved. It's about, it's legal matters. After all, it's a forensic service. But it's nice because you get to see a bit different services and see, okay, what works for me, what do I like, what is this a setting that I would see myself working in the future. So I've mainly been working with, I just started the second placement, it's only been a month. But yeah, moving forward, there's going to be a placement with older adults, and a placement with intellectual disability. So during these two placements, you get more chance to do cognitive assessments. Um, so the WISC, for example, and you actually do get, this is something that it's something called a competency. So you actually, one of the tasks that you do as a trainee clinical psychologist at King's is that you fill particular competency to show that you acquired some specific skills. And one of them is, showing that you have particular CBT skills. One of them is a bit more general, and one of them is about actually, doing a full cognitive assessment, which will be in the next year, or in the next year.
Well, thank you, Laura. That does sound obviously quite intense, but really like you'd learned so much on this course. I just had one more question that popped into my mind, just about kind of how is it all really assessed? Because I guess that you are seeing clients as well, so I'm assuming the client hours are assessed somehow, and there's obviously the research element. Are there also exams?
So at King's, what happens is that during your first year, what you do is, research-wise, you have something called a service evaluation project. So you get to evaluate a service you worked in. So for me, it's about evaluating the service the student service I worked in during my first placement. You also have to work on your research proposal, but you also have exams in June. And you have to do these two of the competencies that I talked to you about. You have to show a particular clinical skill. The second year, what you do is you have to submit a literature review, and you also have to do one competency, but you don't have exams anymore. And during your third year, actually submit your final thesis that you would have started working, hopefully by the beginning of the second year.
Okay, I see. So just the first year is where you kind of have exams, and then it kind of gets different towards the end. Okay, well, thank you so much, Laura. It's actually been really helpful to hear, especially as these are questions that I'm really interested in. And it sounds like you're like doing so well and learning so much. So I wish you all the best with your PhD program.